This is Jilliana Ranicar-Breese, and I'm here in Paris with Valerie Neblett, who I had the pleasure of meeting at the Select quite recently. And Valerie, Valerie speaks fluent French, fluent Spanish. She's a globe-trotter. But originally from, where are you originally from, Valerie?
I'm originally from New York.
New York City or state?
Northport, Long Island.
Okay. And you were heavily influenced by your father because he was a Wall Street trader, right?
Yes, he started on Wall Street when he was 14 as a runner. And we were all brought up with the auspices of learning the market and trading.
Oh, most unusual. Yes, and so how old were you when you first started buying stock?
I don't recall, but it was at a young age.
And you were telling me about your grandfather on your mother's side. Tell me about him.
Yes, my grandfather on my mother's side, or an ancestor, owned Ellis Island.
Wow.
Samuel Ellis.
Right.
And I'm assuming it was adverse possession because in 1924 it was no longer ours.
Right. Well, of course, we all know about Ellis Island.
Yes.
All the immigrants had to come through Ellis Island. Of course, no idea why they chose Ellis Island in particular. Have you been to Ellis Island?
Yes, I went and I talked to the docents and I mentioned Samuel Ellis, and right away they wanted me to join the association and the Confederate Dames and the women of the Confederate.
Oh, fascinating, absolutely fascinating. But now, you, as a young woman, you came to Paris, didn't you?
Yes, I left New York City after selling $600 worth of gold stock, and came over here and started working.
Right, well tell me about that.
The first night I slept in a cafe because I had no place to stay.
Did you already speak French?
No, I didn't speak a word of French.
Okay.
Except a few.
So you went to one of the posh hotels. Which one was it?
I went to the Westminster Hotel, and he interviewed me, and I kept repeating, oui.
Because he asked you if you spoke French.
Oui, and I didn't understand a word he said, and he gave me a job as a telephone operator. And the next thing I knew...
Because you needed to speak English for that, of course.
Well, yes, and obviously French.
Yeah.
And the next thing I knew, he was always screaming at me because I got the numbers all mixed up. At the meantime, I was still at the Alliance Française trying to do a speed course in French.
Right.
Being a telephone operator.
So how long were you there for?
I would say I was there for a year, and then I ran over to see my mom, and then they fired me when I got back, and I started at the Grand Hotel.
Right.
As a telephone operator. And of course, when you plug the phones in.
Yeah, the old-fashioned. This was the 70s, right?
They have no more telephone operators now.
Yeah, it's all automatic. But you wanted to be a chef, didn't you?
I always wanted to be a chef, and at that time they had a program called Recyclage. And they said, what would you like to segue into? And I said, I would like to be a chef. And they would say, you sure you don't want to be an actress? I said, no, I don't want to study acting. I want to be a chef. So I ended up at Ferrandi, which is the equivalent of the CIA in New York City.
You better explain what CIA is.
The CIA is the Culinary Institute of America, which I've taken courses at.
Right.
And Ferrandi is the equivalent here in Paris.
Right.
And I ended up with my CAP de cuisine from Ferrandi, and then I went to work with high hopes at the Hotel Intercontinental.
Mm-hmm.
The chef there had just come over from the Four Seasons, and I walked in and I said, listen, I have my CAP de cuisine, I would like to work here. They said, there's absolutely no way you can work here with all the men. The kitchen, they'll be slicing off their fingers. And then I tried to get into the union of chefs, and there were no women in the union. So I was delegated to become a hostess.
The hostess with the mostest.
The hostess with the mostest, and in the afternoons I would go down and work with the pastry chef.
Right. So you never went beyond that then?
I never went beyond that because of the situation at that time.
What's the situation today?
Oh, well, it completely changed, obviously. And I'm sure anybody who has a separated cuisine could start as a commis de cuisine and move up the ladder, or start their own restaurant if they had the funds.
And you're not interested in doing that anymore?
No, somebody just asked me the other day, they said, well, why don't you continue with cooking? I said, well, it's rather a thankless job.
Is it?
No restaurants, 24/7, no traveling, no weekends, no vacations.
But you're still a foodie, are you?
I'm still a foodie. Last year when I arrived in Paris, I did the Hotel Ritz pâtisserie class.
Oh, right, yes.
And that was 3 weeks of 8 to 4 in the pastry under the chefs.
So that was your
Paris.
Speciality, was it, the pastry?
I always like pastry because it's more mathematical and more precise.
Oh.
I think that's why, but it's always been what I liked most.
Okay, so then you went back to America, and was that when you were trading full-time, or?
I went back to America because I spoke French.
Yes.
There was an ad I was in North Carolina, there was an ad looking for a French-speaking secretary for a mining company, and I applied because I knew in the United States at that time nobody would be speaking a foreign language, and I got the job immediately, and I worked for Minotone, which is a subsidiary of a huge copper company, the biggest in the world, called Pechny, Eugene and Cullman.
And what about the IBM job?
The IBM job was before, when I was working in Paris. That's where I segued into working in marketing in IBM Europe, which was at the Place de Concorde. And unfortunately, they moved out to La Défense.
Oh, yes.
And that's when I started my cooking career.
That's right, that's right. And so later on, well, you got married and...
Later on, when I went back to the United States, I ended up working for a furniture company. And they sent me down to Louisiana, and I always remember my father saying, New Orleans is fabulous, the food's fabulous. So I said, sure, I'll go to New Orleans. And then, being a dancer, I always went out at night, and I met my husband.
When you say a dancer, what kind of dance?
I always like to go out and dance, and since then I've learned salsa and merengue and
all the Latino dances.
All the Latino dances, and I always take lessons.
Well, and you met him on the floor, so to speak.
Yes, actually his friend Red Dog spotted me, and then we moved on to another venue, and he was there. The man I had a date with knew him, and my date did not dance, but Mr. Neblett danced.
And where was he? Was he American?
He was American.
Right, right. So what was he into?
He was...
Professionally, I mean.
He was the owner of Neblett, Beard and Arsenault, a firm of lawyers.
In Louisiana?
In Louisiana, in Alexandria, Louisiana.
So you moved to Louisiana?
So I was already in Louisiana, and I remember I moved in that Monday, and I always said, well, you had a maid, so I had to move in.
So was it love at first bite?
Yes.
What, on the dance floor, and just, that was it?
Exactly.
Fatal attraction?
Fatal attraction.
Wonderful.
And we were married 6 months later.
Oh, lovely.
In Biloxi, Mississippi.
Yes.
And John Boss, my son's godfather, opened up the courthouse on Memorial Day so we could sign the papers.
Wonderful.
And we got married in the backyard of Church of Biloxi, Mississippi.
So how long were you married for? Because unfortunately he's died.
Yes, I was married for 11 years, and unfortunately he was struck with a fatal cancer, pancreatic cancer.
Oh, that's the worst, isn't it?
But I have 2 lovely boys.
Right.
And of course, having children, that keeps you going.
Yes, yes. Well, we'll continue in part 2 about your current life, because in fact you're living here in Paris, but you're also connected with Mexico. So see you in part 2, Valerie.
Sounds wonderful.